Good morning, Shavua Tov. Welcome to our weekly Parsha class, Parsha of Vayakhel. We begin with saying a l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'dvarei. And I also want to mention that today's Torah study, today's Parsha class, is dedicated in memory of Chaya Esther Bas Shlomo, whose yahrzeit was this past week on the 18th of Adar. This is Lance Turkish's grandmother. So today's Torah study, collective Torah study that we all do today, this morning, is going to be in her memory. May her neshama have an aliyah. She'll gain all the energy that she needs, all the spiritual energy that she needs from our Torah study today. Chaya Esther Bas Shlomo. Thank you. The Parsha of Vayakhel, where we're up to today, the second to last Parsha, the book of Shemos, the book of Exodus. And interestingly, I would say 2/3 of the Parsha is almost a repeat. It's a repeat. It's almost word for word for what we have already in the previous Parsha, the Parsha of Teruma, where God directs or instructs Moshe to tell the Jewish people to build for him a tabernacle, to build for him a Mishkan. And it goes into great detail of how to build it, the measurements, the material, the various vessels and artifacts that were in the Mishkan. And in this week's Parsha, it's like, okay, and Moshe did it, or the Jewish people did it, and they made this, and they made that. And it goes into almost like repeating everything that they made a second time, which I think one year we spoke about that. It brings out the love and how much God cherishes the Mishkan. But I want to focus on the beginning of the Parsha. First few verses, which talk about the Shabbos, keeping Shabbos. And even though Shabbos is, keeping Shabbos is not directly talking about building of the Mishkan, but we'll see that from one verse that the Torah talks about the prohibition of lighting fire on Shabbos actually teaches us on a more spiritual level, teaches us what it means, each and every one of us, to build our own Mishkan. Okay, so let's begin. We're on page 584, chapter 35, Vayakhel. So let's set the stage. We are talking about Moshe was on the mountain for 40 days, 40 nights. He comes down from the mountain. We have the sin of the golden calf, last week's Parsha. He breaks the luchos, the tablet that he's holding, the original tablets written by God himself, are shattered. And Moshe returns to the mountain. And Moshe ascends the mountain a second time, and he's there for another 40 days and 40 nights. Not everyone knows that, right? He was on the mountain only for the first time for 40 days, but then he went on the second time, and he continues to pray for the Jewish people. And then he is on the mountain for a third time, 40 days and 40 nights. So in total, Moshe was on the mountain for 120 days. And if you do the math, Shavuos, the 7th of Sivan, the 6th of Sivan, plus 120 days, plus the days that he descended and ascended, the final day where he comes down the mountain after all that is the 10th of Tishrei. Does that ring a bell? 10th of Tishrei is known as Yom Kippur. I'm sure you've heard that before, right? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day of atonement, the day of forgiveness, the day of repentance. And that's because that is the day that God finally forgave the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. Moshe comes down the mountain on Yom Kippur. The next day is where this parsha begins. The day after Yom Kippur, Moshe gathers the Jewish people and he speaks to them the special commandment, the special instruction that he has to build a special home, a special abode, a special space where God's presence can be fully revealed amongst the Jewish people, known as the Mishkan. But before he gets to the Mishkan, he prefaces it with keeping Shabbos. Let's read this inside. Please join with me, chapter 35, verse 1, page 484, 484, 584, I'm sorry, 584, 585. Vayakhel Moshe, and Moshe gathered as Koladas b'nei Yisrael, the whole community, all of the Jewish people. Vayomer aleihem, and he tells them, Eile hadvarim, these are the words, these are the things, Asher tziva Hashem la'aseh oisam, that God has commanded us to be done. And he starts with the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos. Now, the Jewish people already knew about Shabbos because they heard it in the Ten Commandments. One of the Ten Commandments is to remember the Shabbos, keep it holy, and don't do any work, don't do any malacha. But he repeats it again over here. Verse 2. Sheishes yamim te'asem malacha. For 6 days you shall do work. Uvayoyim hashvi'i yihi lachem shkodesh. And on the 7th day, it should be a holy day for you. Shabbos, Shabbosoin laHashem. It is a day of complete rest. If you notice in the Hebrew, Shabbos is translated here not as the Shabbat, the Sabbath, but Shabbos is translated as the word as rest, because Shabbos in Hebrew actually means to rest. It's a day of rest. That's a translation of the word. It's a complete day of rest. The one who does work on Shabbos should be put to death. Verse 3, you should not kindle fire in any of your dwelling places for Yom Shabbos on the day of Shabbos. And then verse 4 and onwards continues with the work of the Mishkan. He starts with the fundraising drive, where we have to raise all these materials. We got to collect all these materials from the Jewish people, and then he goes on. You see the next page where there actually very little commentary, because it's like, again, it's repetitive a little bit, where we go on to talking about the various things that they built in the Mishkan. So just to kind of try to understand this opening of the Parsha, why is Moshe repeating? Why is Moshe repeating the laws of Shabbos? We know Shabbos already. In fact, we know it multiple times. We know it from the Ten Commandments. And the truth is, Shabbos was one of those mitzvahs that the Jewish people already received before the Ten Commandments, before Mount Sinai. If you remember, going back to when the Jewish people left Egypt and they ran out of food, they came complaining to Moshe, and Moshe says, "Okay, and we'll send food from heaven." And the manna from heaven started to come down, right, and fed the Jewish people. And then on Friday they got 2 portions. They didn't know why. So Hashem says, "This is why. Because on Shabbos you should rest. You shouldn't go out and collect the manna. So you get double portion on Friday." So the Jewish people already heard Shabbos already before the Ten Commandments. And then they heard it again during the Ten Commandments. And now Moshe was supposed to be speaking to them about the Mishkan, and he repeats Shabbos again. That's one interesting thing we got to talk about. And the second thing is, why do we specify one prohibition of Shabbos? Do not kindle a flame. I mean, there's a lot more that we don't do on Shabbos. It would be very simple if it was just about kindling a flame, right? There's many things that we don't do on Shabbos. In fact, there's 39 categories of different work that we don't do. Kindling a flame is one of the 39. So why does the Torah specify kindling a flame? So let's start with why in general. Why is Moshe repeating Shabbos over here? So there are two ideas. Idea number one is, it's a preface to the building of the Mishkan. Moshe comes down and says, we have a very important job for you now. It's building a Mishkan for God. The Jewish people, he knows, are going to be very excited about this. Wow, it's amazing. Especially they know that their atonement for their grave sin is dependent on this Mishkan. Of course, they're going to be all in, and perhaps they're going to be working on Shabbos as well. And maybe it would be permissible because we know in general the Mishkan itself, the temple, was active on Shabbos. There were sacrifices being brought, not individual sacrifices, but communal work. The communal offerings were brought on Shabbos as well. So one may think if it's for the Mishkan, if it's for the special home for God, maybe it is permitted to be done on Shabbos as well. So Moshe has to tell them, no, don't work on Shabbos. Even if it means stopping once a week from building the special Mishkan, don't do it on Shabbos. So that's one answer, the technical answer. But to take that a step further, Moshe is actually telling the Jewish people, what does it mean not to work on Shabbos? Because all we know so far is don't do work on Shabbos. But what is work? Right? We know this in education. You always have to be extremely clear with your children. No, it shouldn't be vague, general ideas, very specific. Don't do this, do this. This is what I want from you. The instructions should be very clear. No place for mistake. You tell the Jewish people a few times, do not do any work on Shabbos. What does work mean? Does it mean going to the office? Does it mean business? Does it mean hard labor? I can't schlep heavy tables and benches? Does it mean not to make money? Does it mean not to build something? Like, what is work? What is melacha? The Torah said a few times, don't do work. But what does that mean? The Torah doesn't tell us what is work. What is forbidden to be done on Shabbos? You want me to rest? What is resting on Shabbos? And today, people have the same question as well, because we know that there are many things we don't do on Shabbos. And some may say, what do you mean? Resting for me is doing this work. So, for example, someone says, I love to go into my garden on Shabbos. It's very peaceful and relaxing for me. Well, the Torah technically says, or we'll learn soon, that you're not allowed to do any work with the ground on Shabbos. But for me, it's rest. For me, it's relaxing. I enjoy it. I listen to some music. I listen to a podcast. I'm outside for 3 hours, and I'm in my garden, right? For me, to take a nice drive on a beautiful scenery, scenic road is very relaxing. That's my Shabbos. For me, going to the beach is Shabbos, right? In Israel, it's a very popular thing. People say, oh, I need Shomer Shabbat. I keep Shabbos, I close my business, I go to the beach. So what exactly does it mean to keep Shabbos? What does it mean to not do work, melacha, on Shabbos? So this is actually hinted to us through this Parsha right over here, when Moshe tells us, don't do work, and which means don't build the Mishkan. I mean, in other words, don't build the Mishkan on Shabbos, because building the Mishkan is considered a work, and you're not allowed to do work on Shabbos. Oh, wait. That tells me something. That tells me, it gives me a clue to what work on Shabbos is. That Shabbos work is building the Mishkan. So now, let's analyze what it takes to build the Mishkan. And now I'll know what it means. Don't do malacha, don't do work on Shabbos. Because building the Mishkan is work on Shabbos. So the sages broke it down into 39 categories of work. And spoiler alert, work isn't necessarily hard labor. Work is creative work. Things that can be very easy and simple, like turning on the lights. But what it's doing is it's changing a status of something. That is the specific halachic work that should not be done on Shabbos. So, for example, they say you need bread for the Mishkan. Okay, so baking bread or any part of the process of bread is forbidden on Shabbos, starting with plowing the field, sowing the seeds, harvesting, and everything, every stage in the process of making flour and kneading dough and baking, sifting, every step of the way is a separate category of work. And that's forbidden on Shabbos. And it's forbidden as a standalone category, which means even if I'm not going to bake bread, I just want to dig a little hole in the ground. Oh, that's plowing. But I'm not planning on plowing. I'm just digging a hole in the ground is plowing, even if your intention is not to plow. So maybe I'm also not allowed to pull a heavy table on the ground on Shabbos because the table is going to cause the ground to soil to turn over. So it's plowing, right? So the idea is we take every step of they have to make nets. So they have to tie the nets. So making a knot is considered work on Shabbos. Untying is considered a work on Shabbos. They had to bring an offering. They needed hide. They needed leather or other material from animals, right? So you had to trap the animal. Oh, so you know that trap animals on Shabbos. You had to slaughter an animal. So you know they draw blood on Shabbos. And every step of the way of preparing the hide, smoothing it out, all these is a separate category of work on Shabbos, which can be applied to contemporary areas as well. Lighting a fire was one of them, and extinguishing a fire. All right, these are just one of the many of the 39 categories of work. But the common denominator to all these 39 categories of work is that they are all changing a status of something. Changing the status of something. It's creative work, as we say. We're creating something. We're changing something. We are manipulating the world around us. And that, the Torah says, should not be done on Shabbos. Could you schlep a heavy dresser that you're sweating away on Shabbos? It's permissible. It's a lot of hard labor, but you're not changing a status. You're not creating anything new. You're moving it from A to B. That's fine. You can move furniture. But creative work is forbidden on Shabbos. Now, I would say that on top of that, there are many rabbinic laws, things that we don't do because of rabbinic reasons, which, by the way, going into an office, for example, to sort out some business or whatever, that's actually a rabbinic prohibition. It's not a biblical because I'm not doing any creative work, right? I'm just going into my office and I'm looking at some documents. I'm not writing is prohibited biblically, but if I'm not writing, I'm not turning on any electricity, I'm not driving, I'm just looking at papers, or I'm sitting through meetings, or I'm doing business, I'm speaking to people. That is not creative work. So that is actually permitted biblically, but it's prohibited from the sages for various reasons. And there are many other areas that our sages came and prohibited on Shabbos. But biblically, only creative work. And that is how we learned this from this Parsha. Because when Moshe tells us, don't build the Mishkan on Shabbos, because that is considered work, now they say, oh, finally we know. We heard so many times, don't do work on Shabbos. We were in the dark. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean not to do work on Shabbos? Now we know building the Mishkan is work. So we can figure out what it means not to do work on Shabbos. And the idea behind it, I think we also spoke in other years, that the idea of not working on Shabbos is not just, obviously to remember that Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, but the idea, you can ask the same question: why did Hashem rest on the seventh day? Why can't Hashem work for all 7 days? Right? In fact, this concept, the same idea today, no big deal, right? No one works on Shabbos. So it's Sunday. It's a 5 day work week. But back even 50 years ago, right? People who it was a 6 day work week. Who didn't work on Shabbos, right? To close your store on Shabbos or close your business on Shabbos was unheard of. Right? Sunday is a day, maybe, but the Shabbos, I mean, Saturday, it's a busy day. But today, obviously, a lot of things have changed. Um, but going back, connecting it to the Megillah, where it's coming up in 3 weeks, we'll read the Megillah exactly 3 weeks from today is Purim. So one of the complaints that Haman had to Achashverosh, she said, "Yeshnai Am Echad." There is this one nation who are like this. They're so different. And the Midrash tells us one of the things that he said is that every other day they're telling us we can't work. It's Shabbos today. It's a holiday today. We can't work. It's like the Jewish person who comes to work during the holiday, during the month of Tishrei. And he says, I got a holiday Rosh Hashanah, and I got a holiday Yom Kippur, I got a holiday of Sukkot, Pastora. I mean, the 1 month of like 18 holidays. Haman was saying, what is it with these Jewish people? Once a week, can't work. Every other day is a holiday, right? The idea was that there's a work ethic. People worked 7 days a week. This concept of taking a day off once a week, every seventh day you don't work for a full day was unheard of. It was unheard of. It was a Jewish thing that the other societies didn't accept. They said, a man was created to work. You got to produce. What is this of taking off once a week? 7 day work week. There's no breaks. Literally no breaks. The Jewish people, no, every 7 days they're taking a break. And it's not that the Torah doesn't have any work ethics, right? The Torah says in this week's Parsha, work for 6 days, right? The same way there's a mitzvah to rest on the 7th, there's a mitzvah to work for 6 days, right? So 6 days you should be working. You shouldn't be sitting around doing nothing. Be productive. Contribute to society. It's important. But the 7th day, then you got to be. Then you got to take rest. Then you can't. Then we don't work, right? What's the idea? The idea is that it's a day of contemplation. It's a day of remembering who we are. What are we doing here? Why am I working? What's this for? So it's not about not doing hard labor. It's about not manipulating the world. For 6 days, I am very much involved in the world and changing the world, creating, helping create the world, to elevate the world, to transform the world, tikkun olam, right? All that to correct, to bring godliness, to bring holiness into the world by changing things. When I change the status of something, it's not just a physical switch, it's also a spiritual switch. I've infused it with godliness, with holiness, with purpose, with mission, with reason. Why am I here? Why, right? Every time we do something for a good reason, we are manipulating it for the good. That's the purpose of, that's why we're here, right? To change the world. On Shabbos, let it be. Now, just enjoy. Enjoy your connection with God. This is a day to remember who we are, why we're here, and to foster our connection with Hashem. Kind of that's like the time to recharge. Time to recharge. Now we can go back in on Saturday night, Sunday morning, continue doing our work because we have battery, we have juice, we're able to continue. So it's not about not doing physical labor, but it's about leaving the world as is. Don't change the world. Don't change any status in the world. That's the idea of malacha. So it's not just about do I enjoy this type of work or not? Does this bring rest to me? Yeah, it's important to rest on Shabbos. Take your little Shabbos shluff and get a little rest. It's also part of Shabbos. But the idea is really, it's a time where we let the world be and let us be. We're not dealing with the world in a way of changing the world. Now we're just dealing with us and our connection with God and remembering why we are here. So that is how we learn the idea of keeping Shabbos and how to keep Shabbos, how to rest on Shabbos. From this Parsha, the juxtaposition of the mitzvah or the prohibition of Shabbos with the building of the temple. So we learn that there is creative work that is prohibited on Shabbos. So the 39 rules are biblical. The sages have taught us what these rules are. So they're not written out in the Torah. Most of them, 2 or 3 are, but most of them are not. But it's derived from the verses of the Torah, and therefore it is biblical. The difference between a biblical commandment and a rabbinic commandment is not whether it is written clearly in the Torah, but it is whether it is alluded to in the Torah. Right? If the Torah alludes to something, but it's unclear what it means, and the sages derive it from this verse, then it's still biblical. Because in other words, it's telling us the Torah, by saying this verse, this is the interpretation. This is what it meant. So who told us this? The sages just revealed it to us, but it's a biblical commandment. A rabbinic law is where the Torah doesn't say this. We're adding a new law. Like there are many categories of rabbinic law. Akipa is one of them, but there are many. Like, for example, Shabbat candles is a rabbinic law. The holiday of Purim and Hanukkah is a rabbinic law, right? It's not directly in the Torah, even though the Megillah is really part of the Torah, but it's considered a rabbinic law. Washing our hands, like in the morning or more like before we eat, is a rabbinic law. The concept of saying a blessing before we eat or before we do a mitzvah, the concept of blessings is also a rabbinic law. There's only one blessing, or say two blessings that come to mind right now that are biblical. The blessing of the Kohen does a blessing. The priestly blessing, that's a biblical mitzvah, and the mitzvah of the grace after meal, the benching that we do after we eat a meal, we bread. That is the biblical. But all of the blessings are rabbinic, and there are many other rabbinic laws. And there's different categories of rabbinic laws. We'll have to speak over the music that's going on over here. So basically, that is just to understand what it means to keep Shabbos. Then I want to just mention a little, I think, a fascinating idea that I just read yesterday about this verse of do not kindle fire on Shabbos. I don't think, yeah, if you don't mind, I don't think they realize that we're here. Sorry, we have the Hebrew school that is moving into this facility today, and they are playing some loud music. Do you hear the music from your end? You don't hear? Okay, go here. It's pretty loud.
I'd like to hear it, but I think that's great. They're moving in. You've got the school.
Music to your ears. Okay, so this verse, I always wondered why the Torah specifies this verse, do not kindle fire on Shabbos. Like, one of the 39 categories is not the light of hand, which today in contemporary times is very, very applicable because we have engines, we have motors that are ignited by sparks. So you're kindling a flame, right? So the idea of not driving a car or not turning on the motor of a car may be connected to not kindling a flame. So in contemporary times, the idea of not kindling a flame is very applicable. The general electricity, by the way, is not necessarily the idea, like even lights, not necessarily is not turning on a light on Shabbos fall. Does that fall? It doesn't necessarily fall under the category of not kindling a flame because there's no actual fire. There may be another category, which, by the way, it's a fascinating topic, by the way, to apply contemporary lifestyles to the Torah, to like the 39 categories, to find out what is permitted and prohibited on Shabbos. As things develop, as technology develops, and this is a question until today, when new technology comes up, is this permitted on Shabbos? So you have to go back to analyzing the exact ideas of what is the definition of each of these categories to find out how to apply that to Shabbos, and is there any way around it, right? Like things like timers, right? Can I time something before Shabbos so we'll go on Shabbos, right? Is that allowed? Or it's like, what if it's like automated cars, or am I allowed to do that on Shabbos? Or you have today, what are they called? Where for people who are disabled, they have motorized wheelchairs, right? So could that be used on Shabbos? And what if it's like there's like maybe like Shabbos mode type of things? It's a fascinating area of study, by the way. Maybe one day we'll go a more in-depth class on that. So electricity, what category does that fall into? Some say kindling a flame. Some say actually there's another category of building. And what does building mean? Does that mean build a building, or does that mean build a circuit? build a complete circuit. So if I have a circuit of electricity that is disconnected and I turn the switch and it completes it, maybe I'm building something, right? And maybe there's other things as well, other categories that can fall under. But I mean, the consensus is today that electricity is not allowed to be used on Shabbos, or at least turned on and turned off on Shabbos. But going back to this verse, why does the Torah specify lo yisavaru eju, not kindle a flame on Shabbos? One out of the 39 categories. So the Talmud goes into it, the very technical thing about the prohibition of whatever. I saw something very fascinating, and hope you appreciate it as much as I did. I thought it was amazing. Maimonides. We all know Maimonides. We met Maimonides before. Rabbi Moshe met Maimonides. He codified the entire Torah, including the laws of Shabbos. So in the laws of Shabbos, he tells us the definition of what is the minimal prohibition for the kindling of flame, which is interesting because in many areas of the Torah, there is a certain amount, a measurement of an amount where you need to do something in order to be considered an act. So how much do you have to eat in order to make a blessing? How much do you have to create in order that I should be prohibited? So how big of a flame do you have to make in order to be prohibited? Does it have to be a certain size flame or any little spark? How does it work? So Maimonides says that the prohibition of kindling a flame is a kol shehu, even a drop, a tiny spark. The smallest fire, the smallest flame, it's already prohibited, biblically. But then he gives a caveat, he gives a condition, qualifies it. He says, however, only if tzarich le'efer, if there's a certain need for the flame. For example, you need the ashes. So if you just kindle a tiny flame, but you don't need any of the ashes, then it's not a productive thing. All you're doing is you are destroying the wick or the wood or whatever it is, and there's nothing productive out of it. Nothing, right? It's just destroying. And in general, for destroying things, there's no biblical prohibition. There's no biblical prohibition on destroying. So if I need ashes, so I'm not destroying, I'm creating ashes. So then the smallest flame, the tiny amount of ashes, I'm ready liable, right? It's prohibited. Which is kind of an odd type of law, right? What does this mean? A tiny bit of why isn't there a measurement? Like sometimes there is a measurement. Why even the smallest? And only if I need ashes. So I saw a talk from the Rebbe on this. He says, you have to understand this from a more spiritual and personal standpoint. Because we know that building a mishkan, building a tabernacle, was not something that just happened thousands of years ago. Jewish people in the desert built the mishkan. We are studying about building the mishkan today in Metairie, 2024, because it's applicable to each and every one of us. I have to build the mishkan. Lance has to build the mishkan. Lynn and Dina and Diane and Tom and Brian, each and every one of us. Carmen, are you listening? She's usually on Facebook. Have to build the mishkan. Our own little mishkan. Our own little sanctuary. Our own little abode, a space where God feels at home. We have to build it within us. And this introduction to the building of the Mishkan by telling us the laws of Shabbos is also teaching us not only that we should not build the Mishkan on Shabbos, but it's also teaching us, well, when it's not Shabbos, how do you build a Mishkan? You know how it is? It's through a flame. Through lighting a flame. That's how you build a Mishkan. And what does a flame represent? Fire. When you say someone's on fire, what do you mean? You don't mean someone lighting themselves on fire in front of the consulate. You mean a person's on fire. They're passionate. They're excited. They're enthusiastic. They're fully into it. That's fire. That's heat. Fire is energy. I'm energized. I'm excited. That's fire. And you know how you build a Mishkan? With fire. Light a flame. A flame represents our neshama. Right? When someone passes away, what do we light? light a neshama, a candle, right? Flame, flickering flame. Flames don't sit still. You ever notice that? You could sit and watch fire, which is a fascinating thing. Sometimes when I have a few moments, especially on Hanukkah, you sit and you watch the flames. Just look at that, the nature of a flame fire. It's like a fascinating phenomenon. It's something where you feel the heat, but you can't feel it itself. It's held up, it's like a physical, spiritual type of thing. It's held on by this flame. It's always flickering. It's always moving. And it's going where? Against gravity. It's going upwards. No matter how you hold, I always have this issue with my Havdalah candle with my kids. They all love to hold the Havdalah candle, right? We make Havdalah on Saturday night. And I always tell them, hold it up straight. Like, no, but if I hold it up straight, the wax is going to fall on my fingers. So they all hold it up sideways. And the flame is going up. So no matter if you hold the flame upwards, the flame always goes up. It's always flickering up, which it's explained as the idea of the neshama. Our neshama is like a flame of fire. It's always trying to go up, always trying to connect with God. It's being held down by the wick, it's being held down by the body, which is its purpose, right? So it's meant to be here, but it always yearns to go to connect with God. And some of us have this beautiful Havdalah candle. They have this beautiful big torch, big flame. We're very openly connected with God. We feel this passion, we feel this excitement. What a beautiful Mishkan. What a beautiful home God has within this person to dwell, to reveal himself. It's wonderful. The Rambam tells us, what is the minimum? What is the minimum flame where you could say, oh, this is already a flame which is a start to the building of a Mishkan. It's already counted in building the Mishkan. What does the Rambam say? What's the measurement? Kol shehu, the tiniest flame. The tiniest spark, the tiniest inspiration that we may have to connect with God. That's already the first step to building the Mishkan. That's all you need. Tiny flame. But there's one condition. The condition is that you need it for its ashes. In other words, like this. When you have a fire, you need a lot in order to have a flame flickering, right? You need oxygen. You need the actual heat of the flame. You also need a wick, right? The wick is the most physical out of all of the things you need for a fire. It's the most tangible. It's the most concrete. Says the Rambam, you can have a flame, but you need at least that you have something, you have ashes, you have something tangible. The inspiration cannot remain an inspiration. The flame cannot just remain a little flame. Even if it's the tiniest flame, it's okay, as long as it is somewhat connected to the ashes, meaning there is some type of tangible result that comes out of this inspiration that we have. And that's such a powerful moment. That's a powerful idea in building a Mishkan. Building a Mishkan means bringing us godliness into your life. And for many of us, inspiration is a wonderful thing. It's a feel-good moment, which remains a feel-good moment. But there's no follow-up. There's no lasting effect. We have to be cognizant of that. And when we do have this inspiration, in order for it to count as the first step of our Mishkan building, you have to tie it into an actual follow-up, an actual concrete, tangible, coming through with something more tangible, right? The result that in something where you could say, hey, because of the inspiration, I did X, Y, and Z. That is what the Maimonides is telling us. And this is what the Torah is telling us over here. You want to know how to build a Mishkan? Don't kindle flame, which means the smallest amount of flame is enough to build a Mishkan, as long as tzorech la'efer, as long as there's some type of result in actuality. And it's key because we all have moments of inspiration. We watch a certain video, we hear something. Wow, I'm so inspired. And therefore what? what happens from it? The last few months, we've been hearing stories coming out of Israel, especially, which I highly recommend to listen to some of the Israeli news. You have a lot of it in English, where you hear a lot more of what's going on, maybe more of a clearer picture of what's going on. And you hear a lot of the soldiers coming back now from the front lines. And many of the soldiers, which, by the way, many of the soldiers happen to be observant and very much connected, living very Jewish lives, and some of them are very secular. And maybe a lot of them were non-believers, secular Israelis, who are coming back, and a lot of them are saying, you know what, I saw God in the front lines. I just heard an interview last night with a soldier, that was actually a letter that someone read from a soldier that came back from the front lines. He says, I'm a non-believer. I was a non-believer. I didn't believe in this. But now, no way in the world I believe anyone that tells me that there isn't a God. He said he saw death in front of his eyes. The amount of artillery and RPGs and grenades that were thrown at them. It said it made zero sense that he and his friends came out alive. He says there's no explanation in nature that he is walking and talking, living out of Gaza today. He said he was there for whatever it was, 3 months. Doesn't understand why he's alive. It's not just one incident, 2 incidents. It's on a daily basis. He saw God. And therefore what? Therefore you continue your life. You have to connect it with something tangible. And therefore, he says, I am going to start putting on tefillin. I'm going to start keeping Shabbos. I'm going to start doing something, making this connection that this inspiration should not remain inspiration. You know what happens if it remains inspiration? A week later, a month later, a year later, you don't see a difference. Or you don't necessarily see a difference. The next generation, your children, grandchildren, okay, so you were inspired. What does that mean to me? Which is a fascinating. You hear this, so many people coming out now, which is an amazing thing, by the way. It's just as a side, Israel, they never had such a long war since the War of Independence. All other wars in Israel were always a few days or a few weeks. It never lasted 4 months or 3. What was it? It's 4 months now, right? So they never had this concept of, Israel is made up. The Israeli army is made up of reserves, pretty much, right? We have whatever soldiers are in there for the 2-3 years, but the vast majority of especially the special forces are reservists. Who are reservists? These are people who have families, they have jobs, they have businesses. It's the Israeli economy, and when there's a war, the economy is on standstill. So usually they're there for a week, for 2 weeks, for a month. Okay, they're home. But to be away for 4 months, Israel, there's no precedent. Israel never dealt with this before, to have reservists away for so long. So now the last few weeks, they're sending a lot of the reservists home just to kind of keep the economy going, right? They have businesses. The businesses are closing, right? So you have to keep it going. And then obviously they recycle them, and new reservists come in, whatever. There's enough to go around. But so now you're hearing so many of these stories. People maybe feel inspired, but you always connect it with something tangible, something in actuality. I think I might have said this before. I think it's a powerful, powerful message that the Arik Sharon related. So Arik Sharon, in his formative years, he was working in some office in the Israeli government, and this is before he was general of the army, I believe, and of course before he got into politics. I think this is probably the 60s, maybe the 50s. I don't know when he maybe got into the army. Maybe he was in the army already. I don't know. Either way, he took this trip to America, to the U.S., and it was basically to speak to the American Jewish youth, speak to them about Israel. And he had a tour. He stopped in New York. I think he went all the way to California, and he stopped in multiple cities on the way to speak to the Jewish youth about their connection with Israel. And on the way, he stopped in New York to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I don't remember now if it was on the way in or the way out. Like before he did his tour, he stopped by the Rebbe, or was on the way out before he went back to Israel. he spoke to the Rebbe. But either way, he related this at a public talk at Farbrengen in the town Kfar Chabad in central Israel, at a Farbrengen, that he spoke about his audience and his conversation with the Rebbe. So the Rebbe asked him, tell me, you're going to speak to the American youth. What is your message? What are you telling them? So he speaks to them about the connection that we have to the land of Israel, and how important it is, Jews, their history, our history with Israel, how we have to have a strong connection to Israel to support Israel, right, all that. So the Rebbe says something about the Rebbe says, it's important. I said like this, it's very difficult to pass on a feeling to the next generation. In other words, like this, I think it's a powerful message in general. Parents have a certain feeling for something. It's very dear to them. And in your mind, this is so important to me. Of course, my children will feel the same. If it's dear to me and they hear from me how dear it is, of course, they will have that feeling as well. The Rebbe says, no, it's not the way it works. Your feelings are your feelings. Your children, at most, will say, it was dear to my parents, so I'm going to respect it, or something like that, even if they have that respect to their parents. But not necessarily are they going to have that same feeling. Your feelings are your feelings, my feelings are my feelings. So if you love Israel, for example, that's great. My parents loved Israel. Why should I love Israel? Because my parents did. I mean, yeah, some of it trickles down to children. It's difficult. And by the way, we see this, just look at the Jewish community, right? If you go back 50, 60, 70 years ago, the vast majority of Jewry was very, very strong supporters of Israel. It was like the front and center of everything. Today, unfortunately, a lot of the youth, they don't really understand what's going on in Israel, right? Or whatever. Maybe now, specifically now, last few months, because of this war. But I mean, unfortunately, it's different. So the Rebbe said like this: it's important to talk to the American youth about Israel, about our connection to the land, about the history, about the Jewish history that God gave us. All that is important. But you also have to add something. You have to tell them, connect this inspiration, connect this connection that we have with Israel with something tangible. In other words, do something in your life, incorporate something Jewish in your life for Israel. And then that is so much easier to pass on to the next generation. And as we know with education, right? Do what I say, not do what I do, right? What's the expression? Children always follow, or are more likely to follow, the way we act more than the way we tell them to act, right? If we tell them, don't cross the street at a red light, at a green light, whatever, right? But we ourselves are not following those rules. We just cross when our children at a certain age will say, okay, if daddy did it, I can also do it, right? Right? So even though we tell them, don't do something, but if we don't follow our own instruction, they're going to follow that as well. So if we tell them to love Israel, and therefore we also bring some Judaism into our life, they see Kiddush Friday night. They see Hanukkah candles on Hanukkah. They see a Seder on Pesach. They see going to shul on Shabbos. They see whatever Judaism we're able to incorporate in our life. They see a mezuzah on our front door. Then they say, you know what? This is something I want as well. This is just a way of life. So I'm going to continue this. It's tangible. Something tangible is a lot easier, it's not guaranteed, it's a lot easier to pass this on to the next generation. But a feeling is very different. This is what Sharon, this is what he spoke about. He said, the Rebbe told me, speak to the youth about Israel, but also about bringing something tangible in our life that we do because of Israel, and that can be passed on to the next generation as well. And I think this is the same message over here. We have inspirations. The smallest, the tiniest inspiration. It's great. You're on the right track. It's already first step in building our Mishkan, our personal Mishkan. But you also need the action. It has to be something connected with something real, concrete, something tangible to a mitzvah. And that's how we could build and continue to build our personal Mishkan. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining us on the Sunday morning. We'll see you next week. And Yeah, have a Shavua Tov. Have a good week.
You will have a toe. Thank you, Rabbi.
See you.
Very inspiring.
Thank you, Mendel.
Absolutely. Thank you.
See you
Ladies,
Tuesday.
Monday.